First of all, welcome. Thank you all for joining in. We really appreciate y'all taking time out of your day to spend this here with us. This is the Biodiversity Informatics listening session, which is hosted by BCON and AIBS as a part of an NSF-funded BIOFAIR data network project. And we'll give more information on that in just a few minutes, as well as our planned activities and what we hope to achieve in this particular session. But before we get started, we're going to go and introduce the team that's running this session today. First off, I'm Dory Contreras. I'm a curator of paleobotany at the Perot Museum of Nature and Science, also on the steering committee of BCON and on the development team for the integrated paleobotany database. Andy, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Andy Bentley. I'm the Ichthyology Collection Manager at the Biodiversity Institute at the University of Kansas and also on the steering committee of BCON. Mike, you want to go next?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you here on the Zoom screen. I am Mike Webster. I'm the director of the Macaulay Library, which is a biodiversity and natural history media collection at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I will pass it on to Cameron.
Hello there. My name is Cameron. I am Cameron Pittman. I am one of the assistant collection managers at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, and I'm one of the BCON emerging professionals. And I'll pass it off to Jose.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Joseph Orts. I'm in the computer engineering faculty at the University of Florida, but I'm also the co-PI for iDigBio in charge of the cyber infrastructure. And I'll pass it to Sharif.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Sharif. I am currently working as a data architect at the Naturalis Biodiversity Center in Leiden in the Netherlands. And I'm also involved in the DISCO project. And I will hand it over to Tim.
Thanks, Sharif. Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Robertson. I'm the Deputy Director and Head of Informatics at the GBIF Secretariat. I will hand over to Larry, please. Was that correct, Andy?
No, I don't think we're going to introduce everybody.
Marie, perhaps?
No, thank you. I'm here.
All right, well, great. So this is the team that's leading the session today. Now we'll go ahead and get started first with some housekeeping items before we jump into our agenda. All right, so first of all, you may have noticed this session is being recorded. We are going to use AI summary tools for note-taking purposes. So please let us know in the chat if you have any objections to recording or AI tools summarizing our discussion today. We do hope that you're able to engage in this session with your camera on. That just makes it a lot more engaging and fun for everyone. You can use the chat feature to share comments, ask questions, introduce yourselves, anything you like throughout the session. We also have a Google document to summarize and compile comments from the session, and we're going to share the link right now. Cameron has just shared it in the chat. So go ahead and open that page up and have that open so you can add to it throughout the session if you choose. You can contact AIBS IT support, that's Diane, via chat if you're experiencing any technical difficulties throughout this session, and she's there to support you. So the basic agenda, we're going to have, well, we're knee deep in our brief introductions, but we also have a total of about 40 minutes of presentations split between 4 different presentations. And most of our time today is going to be committed to discussion, which we hope will be very engaging. If you have questions throughout the session or you want to talk and have your mic turned on, please raise your hand. Use the little raise your hand feature there at the bottom of Zoom. You can also just submit your questions to the chat or say that you want to contribute there in the chat, and we'll bring that up in the discussion. So our organizers will be taking notes in addition to the AI summarizing and gathering comments in that Google Doc as well, so that we can make a summary report after the session. And next slide, please. And so our more detailed agenda for today already got our welcome and introductions most of the way through. Then Andy is going to give a presentation on Beacon and the BIOFAIR project, also introducing the extended specimen network if you're not already familiar with that concept. Then we'll have a short discussion, then go into 3 presentations from GBIF, DISCO, and iSamples. And then the remainder of the time will be contributed to a discussion section. And with that, I think we're ready for you, Andy. You want to take it away?
Sounds good. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, from wherever you're joining us from. First, I'd just like to give a little background on the Biodiversity Collections Network, or Beacon. This was founded through a partnership of the American Institute of Biological Sciences, or AIBS, the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections, and the Natural Science Collections Alliance. Beacon is a group that is dedicated to helping facilitate and expand the utility of biological collections by promoting new uses of collections and their derivative data. It emerged from a 5-year RCN grant from NSF awarded in 2014, and although the initial grant ended in 2020, the work of the group has continued. There are a range of activities that Beacon has been involved in over the past decade, including our advocacy on behalf of collections and the Extended Specimen Network, various community webinars and workshops, as well as several reports and publications. A full list of these can be found on the Beacon website. A number of key initiatives have emerged from Beacon-supported activities. The one most relevant to the BIOFAIR project is the Extended Specimen Network, which came out of a community effort to leverage digitized specimen data to address scientific and environmental challenges. Another notable achievement is our work on a specimen management plan requirement for grant-funded research. A recently published paper provides guidance on implementing a specimen management plan requirement for funding applications, and a link to that is being put in the chat right now. The Extended Specimen Network report led by the Beacon Advisory Committee grew out of a year-long consultation with the biodiversity collections and research communities that was conducted in 2017 at the request of NSF. It culminated in a workshop in October of 2018 where 20 community representatives crafted a report based on the community consultations and the experiences of the representatives. The report and subsequent publication argues that transforming our wealth of physical specimens and related digital data into an extended specimen network, or ESN, should be the next community priority. The ESN would build upon the success of specimen digitization by creating a robust linked web of data, integrating biodiversity specimens and their associated primary data with derivative and complementary data, as first envisaged by Mike Webster in 2017. This network of specimen-linked data would facilitate and inform an ever-growing range of complex research questions and fundamental research endeavors, such as species extinction, climate change, spread of disease, tracking invasive species, and more. Key to the success of the Extended Specimen Network is the involvement of the global community in this effort, together with engagement with data communities whose domains are in the 2nd and 3rd extension orbits to create the needed data linkages. This has led to an international collaboration on a combined digital extended specimen, or DES, initiative with DISCO and others to align efforts and build the necessary infrastructure and capacity to support this endeavor. Realizing the ESN vision will involve additional collecting and digitization of specimen data, or what we call born digital documentation of specimens, along with continued retroactive specimen digitization, as well as data annotation and augmentation. Most important is the development of a more robust means of linking or integrating specimen data to other data sets through the creation of enhanced data portals and cyber infrastructure to increase the utility of these data for research and education. This will involve both institutional and community infrastructure along with permanent repositories for the specimen data, while sustaining this network through the development of a data literate workforce. Beacon is obviously interested in the conversation about integrating data because extended specimens rely on it. Cyber infrastructure to support deep integration across all levels of specimen data, multiple communities, and the products of collections-based research, facilitated through the use of unique identifiers assigned to publish FAIR data objects, will allow us to answer important complex research questions. So how can the ESN envisage integrating data and expand the utility of these collections and their associated data to broader communities? So in addition to international cooperation among the scientific collections community, engagement with the broader biological and environmental data community is critical to the creation of an extended specimen network, as our report envisaged. So our current project, the NSF-funded BIOFAIR data network, has the goal of engaging an expansive set of current and prospective partners towards building an integrated, open, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data network. We aim to identify shared goals and challenges with data communities and to explore the feasibility of uniting these into a comprehensive network of biological data. This is being achieved through 6 virtual listening sessions, of which this is the last in the series. These sessions have focused on 6 data domains where we have brought together producers, managers, and users of data derived from biological organisms and their habitats, as well as other experts like computer scientists and informaticians. This will all lead to a final interdisciplinary workshop in the 2nd year of the project, the findings of which will be brought together into a final report and publication. What we hope emerges from the BIOFAIR Data Network project is a commitment among the communities we have identified to work collaboratively towards the creation of an integrated data network and a plan for how such a network might be created and managed. Specific products include a statement of engagement articulating a set agreed upon principles and collaborative agreements, as well as a roadmap that outlines gaps, needs and actions, as well as one or more publications. The 2-hour virtual listening sessions have focused on exploring the current and ongoing community needs and future goals of the contributors, managers, and end users of biodiversity data, with the objective of identifying information gaps and common goals. We hope to develop a shared vision for integrated data that leverages technological advances and data resources from a wide range of data communities and services the needs of research, education, conservation, biosecurity, and the bioeconomy. Discussions from each listening sessions have been synthesized into summary reports. Recordings of the previous sessions have been posted online, and broader public input will be sought asynchronously, which will be incorporated into the final report. So that brings us to our listening session on biodiversity informatics, which hopes to address data integration and the critical infrastructure needed to make this happen. This listening session is being led by the group listed above, with the help of key domain representatives from GBIF, IDIC Bio, and DISCO. Our hope is that we can explore what tools and infrastructure already exist, what we are missing, how we can organize these existing efforts into a synergistic extended specimen infrastructure. Some great conversations have already taken place in the other domain-specific listening sessions, so hopefully we can build on that during this session. It is obviously vitally important to be able to integrate data to enable new and novel research applications, as well as access by new emerging stakeholders. This needs to be achieved in the context of fair data, but also in the context of protecting data sovereignty and traditional knowledge. Some of this integration is already happening through existing infrastructures of CMSs and aggregators, as well as initiatives like iSamples, DISCO, and Geome, but it is still mainly human mediated. We thus need a more comprehensive automated solution that integrates data into a digital extended specimen architecture and allows for synchronization and community annotation of data. So the question is, how do we achieve this given the current landscape and our future plans? So with that, I'm going to hand over to Mike Webster, who's going to lead our first short discussion session, after which we'll hear from some of these existing infrastructure projects. All yours,
Excellent.
Mike.
Thanks, Andy. Yep. Very good. Thank you. So with that nice introduction from Andy, we want to open it up now for just a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, to talk about what is it that we mean when we say data integration. So in bold on this slide that you're seeing now is the definition that the organizers of this particular session have been using. So to us, data integration means biodiversity data integration is the process of combining various kinds of data from different sources to provide a unified view for both users and computer applications, and also allow combination, manipulation, and analysis of these and new data. And so putting that out there, I'd like to hear from some of you about whether you think this captures what you think of when we talk about data integration. And Also, I guess, are there particular kinds of data that are most important to be integrating with? And who are the stakeholders or other domains that should be part of this effort and discussion? So I'd like to open it up for a few minutes to hear your thoughts on that. And remember, please use the raised hand function if you have a comment.
Can't find the raised hand comment.
Go ahead, Deb.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you for this. I think one of the stakeholders we continue to see, I think, possible benefits from connecting to would be the humanities world. They've dealt with and asked these same questions. So talking with some of them, I think, could be extremely useful to us in terms of what we decide to do in terms of other domains and lessons learned from them.
That's a great point, Deb. Could you just clarify, are you saying that the people in the humanities realm have already started building something akin to what we're talking about here?
Or
and
asking
we could learn some lessons from them?
No, they're asking the same questions. So talking to them about what they are learning from that, I think they started having this conversation before us, is what I'm saying. So it would be good to, there's a GBIF, or sorry, there's an old, trying to remember, it's on the GBIF discourse site. There's an old post from someone we can go back and revisit where she actually pointed at specific projects. And I think it would be good to go back and look at those. They have some parallels to this particular group and the kind of things we're saying. I'll put a link.
Excellent. That's great. Thanks, Deb.
You're welcome.
Other thoughts about data integration and who we should be including in this conversation? Donat.
Hi, I'm Donato Agosti from Platzi. We are just running a symposium last week on 10 years of Buchholz Declaration Open Knowledge Data Management. And the outcome of this meeting was that we should liberate data from publications. When we talk about specimens, the results about these specimens are published in scientific literature. And what I suggest is that we actually make sure we integrate and we enable a link from a specimen to what's known about the specimen by linking material citations, the links in publications to the specimen. And that means it's a big endeavor talking to the natural history libraries and the publishers to extend the digital specimens.
Excellent. That's a great thought and a very important point. Thank you. Chuck, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think I'm Chuck Cook from the Global Biodata Coalition. And we think about integration of data quite a bit. And I guess I have two questions and they follow up. I'm following from both Donat's and Deb's comments. And the first, my first question is, what's the goal? What's the purpose of the data integration? I mean, is it finding the data? Is it allowing people to coordinate the data? I mean, I suspect that's known. I just haven't read all I don't have the background for this meeting. And following up on Deb's comment, I'd like to expand integration. There are many data resources and many types of data. We at GBC, we work a lot with biological data, which includes the biodiversity data, but it also includes things like sequence databases. Another thing to think about is how will this network coordinate or interact with those other, in addition to the humanities, with the other sort of more bespoke data resources, for instance, sequence databases, etc. So I've just asked questions. I haven't provided any answers, so just making the whole problem even more difficult. But it's still the beginning of the day, so I can do that. Thanks.
You certainly can do that, Chuck. I appreciate it. Those are good questions. I think they will come up in our later discussions. But I will say very, very briefly before I turn it over to Michelle, that to me, the idea is you're bringing together disparate sorts of data that need to be connected to each other in order to be most useful for a new analysis, right?
Okay.
And so that's my very shorthand way of thinking about it. Michelle, you have a thought?
Yes. Hi. Good morning, everybody.
Deb was so fast with her raised hand, I was also going to mention something about the humanities and making sure we can start at least discussions with them. I would say one thing about working with a lot of archival informatics and databases. So we are actually integrating archives with our specimen, our biological collections database, ARCDOS, and we're finding a lot of barriers. And so talking about stakeholders, you know, a lot of it's just also just the informatics programmers who are behind the scenes of all these places trying to make those connections. And, you know, even in the archival world, they I continuously have discussions with librarian programmers, and their barriers are, you know, really like all the kinds of different formats for their metadata and trying to integrate and talk across those. And those have been really difficult to overcome. How we're converting one from the other is also really not clear. You know, I mean, now they're trying some AI tools, perhaps. They've also suggested that we just start recataloging things in a different format. So these are just, you know, some of the mechanics that are one of those stakeholder, you know, issues. But I feel like discussing or trying to integrate with those other disciplines early as they try to figure out these problems would be beneficial for us, because, you know, collaborating, making sure we don't create new formats that then become a new set of hurdles would be really important moving forward. So I just wanted to make that comment about the library world. But I do agree there's a lot of lessons learned there, since their job is to also organize information as is ours. The other comment about stakeholders is the trying to recognize the different kinds of research users and different discovery points, because I think within the biodiversity realm, we think of discovery as in portals and in, you know, big aggregators like GBIF or our own network. But a lot of other humanities-based researchers have a completely different way of finding discovery, you know, really through more bibliographic databases, through archival finding aids, you know, and that has a different structure, but not too far away from what we want, but more usually there's sort of a derivative of the raw data, such as a finding aid. So I think there's definitely places where there's again, lessons learned, but you know, some kind of middle ground that we can find. It's just a completely sort of different way of thinking about how their researchers discover information.
Right. Right. Okay. Excellent comment. Very pertinent thoughts. Thanks very much for that, Michelle. Larry, I see your hand up.
Yeah, just extending the current comments, I think not only is it the case that this interoperability across different kinds of data and different sources is a problem across academic domains in general, scientific and humanities, but it's not unique to science and academics. It's also an industrial issue. So one of the more interesting efforts out of the FAIR Digital Object Forum is connecting to various industry standards, where they have to trade not a different kind of data, it's operational data. It's how do you keep track of different kinds of industrial process data. And at the bottom, it's the same problem. Just like moving bits across the internet is not unique to any particular science or endeavor, figuring out how to operationalize disparate data is not unique to any particular effort.
Great. Thanks, Larry. Those are good thoughts. Very pertinent. Thanks to everybody who just contributed those thoughts. We're keeping this part of the discussion relatively short, but we will be coming back after a couple more presentations to have a much longer period for discussion on some of the questions and issues that have already started to come up here. But with that, I'd like to turn it back to Dory now.
Great. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, everyone. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into a series of presentations, and we're going to start with one by GBIF, and this will be by Marie Grosjean, I think is how pronounce it.
Yes, thank you, Doi. Can you hear me fine? Yeah?
Yes, you sound
Okay.
great.
Thanks. So I'm presenting on behalf of, I guess, Tim. Anyway. Hi, hello, my name is Marie Grosjean. I'm a data administrator at the GBIF Secretariat. And I'm going to present a little bit of how a specimen can look like on GBIF. And I'm going to say GBIF extended because I'm also going to talk about hosted portals and GR cycle. So I titled it The Secret Life of a Digital Specimen Record on GBIF. Next slide, please. I think most of you are familiar with GBIF, so I don't really need to go into much details, but as a reminder, GBIF stands for Global Biodiversity Information Facility, and we're an intergovernmental network which aims to bring open data, open biodiversity data to anyone on Earth. And yeah, I'm going to show you how specimens look like on GBIF. Next slide, please. So this is a specimen from the MCZ. This is just one example, right? It's a specimen of coral, and if you look at it on gbif.org, you have a URL here. You can see that there's a lot of information, date, coordinates, and so on. It's quite exhaustive. If you go on to the next slide, you can access it. You can see it in a gallery. You can access it. It's indexed and find it in a search in the GBIF search portal, and you can also download it. And if it's part of a download, then it will be associated with a DOI together with other records downloaded from GBIF, and someone citing this DOI can then be tracked, and the citations are aggregated at the dataset level or at the data provider level. So in this case, the Harvard University. It looks like that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I have a little video where this is an occurrence page on GBIF, and if we scroll down, we can see that we can also link it to the Global Registry of Scientific Collections, GR Cycles. It's a different page, and it can be aggregated together with other specimen-related records in dashboards on collection pages, and can have a lot of information associated with those dashboards, such as IUCN threat status and so on. Yes, thank you. Next slide. Yes. So that's, yes. But also we can have other things that we can show on GR Cycle. I mean, the information is also on GBIF. This is a little visual to show related records. So this is the example where this was the original record, and we can see that we find it's related to another record. It comes from the ANDCNC. And for that record, we actually have a link to an associated sequence. So we think that they relate to the same specimen because they have a number of information in common, such as, yeah, well, we don't need to replay the video, but such as the same scientific name and the same coordinates, dates, and so on, collection dates. So we think it might be related there. And this way of linking records together can allow us to enrich information about particular specimens. So in this example, you already had a pretty exhaustive information on one specimen, but now we also have an associated sequence that can be found. Next slide, please. So actually, we run periodically an algorithm that will try to identify related records on GBIF. It's not just for specimen records. It could also look at other kind of records, such as treatments from journals, material citation records, or also observations. But they might all relate to the same actual physical specimen. Sometimes you might have an observation on iNaturalist, which actually ends up being a specimen in a museum. And I'm not going to go into details. I have hidden slides if you have questions, but briefly, we have a few steps in the process to identify related records. We first select some candidates across data sets, and then we compare them, and then we make all kinds of assertions, and such as, for example, whether they have the same scientific names, whether they have the same geolocation, and so on. And then based on sets of assertions, we say that those specimens might be, or sorry, those records might be related. Next slide. So I showed previously an example where it was quite simple. We only had 2 potentially related records, but it can get quite complicated. So this is another view on the GeoCycle website, and you can see that you can have a lot of different records that might be potentially related, and some of them are museum records. But in this particular example, I'm actually showing also a record that comes from a digital journal article, which was provided to GBIF as an occurrence record by Plazi. And so you can also link in some ways also to the original literature sometimes. And you can see also, you might don't see actually because it's a static image, but there is like this record that's like has stripes on it. That means that there is a different identification for that record. But it seems like they could still be relating to the same specimen. So you can have quite a lot of information potentially that can be put in one place. Next slide, please. Yes. So that's what we have right now on GBIF, on GeoCycle. We also are working on refining the GBIF data model, and not going to go into detail at all on this, but this is to mention that there are efforts to improve the type of data that can be shared on GBIF, especially in the context of specimen sharing. If you're interested, there is this page called the new data model, and we have a series of webinars that you can watch as well. But also Tim is here and he can answer all the questions. So yes. Next slide, please. Also, just a quick note that sometimes it might be relevant to represent specimens that might not actually be fully digitized, or not digitized at all sometimes, or only partially digitized. And so in the context of the work of development on the Global Registry of Scientific Collections, we have recently implemented something that we call the collection descriptors. And there are ways to share information about specimens that might not be digitized. So at really a higher level of information, like I have, 300 specimens for that particular taxonomic group and so on. And it might still be relevant to show, even if you don't have fully digitized specimens, you might still want to make your collection discoverable. So that's just to mention that there are other ways to share information, even when it's not all digitized. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, this is an example of collection descriptors. I forgot to put that slide, sorry. So this was I made this video when it was only on the test system, but actually now it's implemented in GeoCycle. It looks like this. This is an example where you can have collection descriptors for a particular collection. So here we have a bunch of groups and some like numbers of specimens. And you can see that if you look for the scientific names, you might be able to find actually the collection that mentioned that they have specimens from that species. Next slide, please. Next one. Yeah, I don't know why it's twice. Well, okay, that was it. Thank you very much. Let me know if you have any question, and also let Tim if you have any questions, because he knows more, because he's, the head of informatics and everything. Thank you again.
Thank you, Marie. That was wonderful. It was a really nice overview and insightful. Yeah, if you have questions, definitely pop them in the chat and we should be able to answer. We're going to go ahead and move on to our second presentation on DISCO. This will be by Sharif. You want to take it away?
Yes, thank you everyone for joining, and thanks to Beacon and the IBS for organizing this. I'm really glad to be part of this informatics session. So I'll be talking about DISCO. Yeah, next slide, please. So DISCO is a distributed system of scientific collections. So we're bringing together European natural history collections into a digital infrastructure that will function as a unified collection. And currently we're working with almost 200 institutions across 23 countries. And So I'll briefly talk about what we mean by this unified collection, and one of the, of course, the technical aspect and the data aspect as well. However, there's also operational and organizational aspect involved. So for example, we're also working towards shared curation and access policies across different countries that can help to bring together all of this collection in a coherent manner. So in the next slide, I'll talk about what do we mean. So one way you can think about as a one-stop digital infrastructure, even though you see the distributed name in our name, behind the scene, there's a lot of different components, but we want to bring together how people access some of this data, both from the biological and geological collections that we have across different organizations. And this can mean virtual access, physical access to the data. It can also mean access to different facilities that we have in our institutions. It could be the lab, and of course the expertise that is attached to all of this data. For example, very specific taxonomic or biodiversity informatics experts that can help you with your research and the data. And that access and one-stop provides the foundation of what we're calling the different user services that we'll be building on top of all of these. And you can find out more in our website. So this could be as simple as digitization, enhancing the records with your annotation, or very specific research use case that your particular need that you might have for your research. And all of these are, you can think of it as a new type of digital transformation that we need to bring together all of the fragmented landscape of natural history collections today. And if you go to the next slide, we have a visual to show you. So of course, digital transformation, as you know, it's not new. We've been digitizing and publishing and collecting data for a long time. However, some of these things are happening sort of in a, you can think of it as a research project or grant-funded project, or in a silo that's either national or regional. Of course, we need those research support. We need those grant projects. They're the foundation of some of this data publishing and data mobilization. However, bringing them together, we need an integrated model. So for example, let's say I'm a researcher interested in genomics. I get a grant and I go and do my research and I publish, and that's it, I move on. Sometimes all of these things are not connected or integrated. And often happens, again, the example we talked about earlier, from publication to specimen, for specimen to genomics, all of the things are happening, but often in a siloed manner. So this research infrastructure model, with the support from the European Union and also from the organization, what we're looking into is bringing the foundation in a much more sustainable manner, beyond your research grant, beyond your project, and to provide faster access, global access, and of course, making your data ready to do all sorts of exciting new things that probably wasn't possible to do before. And that's where, DISCO is going towards. And in the next slide, you'll see sort of our timeline. Of course, as you can imagine, this is a long effort and steady effort that we're going towards. So currently we're in our transition phase. And what we are working towards is what is called within the European infrastructure, ERIC, European Research Infrastructure Consortium, which is basically a legal framework that will support our organizations and all the consortiums coming together to provide all of these services. And today, of course, I'll be mostly focusing on the data and the technical part, but as you can imagine, this is not just technical. There's also all of this legal and organizational aspect involved. So if you're interested in that, please go to our website or also reach out. I can provide more information. But again, the idea is all of these smaller projects and specific endeavors helping us to build this foundation, to build a larger infrastructure. So let's move on to the next slide to talk about more technical aspects. So as you heard already about this idea of extended specimen network. So building on that idea, working with the global community, what we're implementing is a fair digital object for the digital specimen. And you can think of it as, of course, it's a digital representation. You can find all the information attached to the specimen here, all the links. So what's new about this is that we can extend it. We can dynamically act on this data, either from a human perspective or, of course, annotate with machines. And of course, we want to do it with millions of specimens, link them, annotate them, curate them. And this is where we need a foundation to build all of this digital specimen, publish them, use them, link them together. And it's not a single entity anymore. So bringing all of together requires the infrastructure that we are building. And of course, we want this to be fair. We want people to find them, access them, link them, and reuse them in a different research infrastructure and research use case. So some of the building components that we need in the next slide, you can see that, of course, we're not starting this from zero. We are part of a bigger community, all the organization that is involved, and of course, all the publishers and aggregators and repositories that we have. So you can imagine Disco sitting sort of in the middle. On the left-hand side, we have all of our collection management systems and museums and organizations providing data. And what our new infrastructure will enable is this idea of community curation and annotation. Again, both from a individual human annotation perspective, but also we want to extend this with the different types of services. And then the data can still go to aggregator, but of course in an enriched manner. And we also want that enrichment and new data going back to the collections to provide more access and more data on a local level. And these services could be developed by Disco, or we are also interested in different services integration, different service integration. So for example, let's say you have a specific AI model that reads a particular OCR text or handwritten text that needs to be incorporated with millions of specimens. And you might not have the infrastructure support to do that. You can bring it to Disco, we can try to integrate it and plug it in our infrastructure and see what happens. And provide the enrichment. So there are different possibilities that opens up while we add all of this digital specimen information within the infrastructure. Next slide, please. So to build that, I will highlight a few things. Of course, there's a lot of detailed information that's needed. So first, we need a way to describe this new entity, what we're calling digital specimen. And we need a data schema, and we're building something called Open Digital Specimen, and I'll briefly talk a little bit more about this soon. And we also need a way to ingest all of these millions of specimens, harmonize them, and publish them. So again, to do all of this new addition, curation, and annotation in the platform. And one of the crucial important aspect of that, we need persistently identify this object with a PID service, a persistent identifier service. And that's also a very big component in the digital specimen infrastructure. And we also want to provide both machines and humans to work on it. So we need to authorize them. We don't, of course, a lot of this data will be openly available, but if you want to work on it, there needs to be some way to authenticate and authorize. And we want to check the provenance, who did what, when. Again, both from the machine and human perspective. And one of the biggest improvement that we're working on now that will allow you to schedule all of these annotation in a batch processing way to collectively work on millions of specimens. The next slide, please. So a little bit more on this OpenDS that I briefly talked about. So why do we need a new data model? Of course, we have a lot of different standards in our community already. However, in order to do all of this machine actionable ideas and AI and integrate with the infrastructure, we need a consistent data model. And that's where we sort of ran into some issues to looking into how currently the data standard has been applied. Of course, it's great that we have the community data standards. However, not every organization, every data sets use the data standards in a similar manner. For example, different keys and value pairs will be used in a different way from different data sets. So we need the consistency to bring them into the infrastructure level. And that's sort of the basis of what we're calling the FAIR digital object. And we are bringing in data from different sources. It could be Darwin Core Archive and BioCase, and that could be harmonized in a specification. We are also working with MIDS, the minimum information for digital specimen. And there are cases where we needed to create new terms and then making sure those terms are consistency, and we'll provide some more information on that. And we also work closely with GBIF with the unified data model to see how we can align with that. We looked in the relational structure and opted for a JSON schema that provided a little bit more flexibility. Provenance I already mentioned. And one of the key things that we're working on is our core is digital specimen instead of the organism. So the digital specimen, again, becoming the center in our infrastructure that allowing us to do all of this curation and annotation. And in the next slide, I have some links. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're using existing data terms, standards as much as possible, but there are some new terms that we introduced that are specifically needed for some of the things we're trying to do. So you can find out more in this Disco Terms website. And we also have all of our data schema published in our schema repository because we also have other smaller digital objects that are connected with a specimen that you can see. And currently we are in the middle of a public review. So we're asking the community to provide us feedback about this data model and the terms that we're using. So if you follow these links and also in the GitHub, you will find more information about where it came from and how, and also a way to provide some feedback. So we'll really appreciate if you take some time and look at that. And yeah, in the next slide, just very briefly. So of course, there's a lot of technical details. I won't go into that. This is quickly to show you under the hood what's happening. I mentioned about the persistent identifier. So when we ingest, we have a local persistent identifier infrastructure that will provide PID for that, and we store them. And of course, there's different components that helping us to publish them. So in a repository where you can find them, and of course, you can link them and use them in different way. In the next slide, a little bit more information about the PID. Next slide, please. Yeah, so currently we're working with the DOI Foundation and the data site. And one of the exciting things that will happen is that we actually have a DOI prefix reserved at 10.35.35 for the digital specimen. So this DOI, if you're familiar with DOI, similar to your data sets or papers. So within this infrastructure now, we can assign DOI to each digital specimen. And there is specific metadata that will also go to data site. That means that it will be also indexed and findable from the common repository that data site maintains. And again, a lot of these things are happening, and we're in conversation both with DataSite and DOI Foundation. You can find out more about that in GitHub, but please also reach out to us. And in the next slide, I have a couple examples on the specific metadata they're dealing with. And this implementation, we are using of course, a DOI-based implementation, which uses the handle system. And the handle system allows us to use this specific type of what we call fair digital object record within our specimen. And of course, the specimen has lots of data that you can resolve to. If you go to the specimen record, as you can see, there will be lots of information, but there are a particular type of sort of high-level metadata that we're exposing in a first level. So for example, in this case, you can see this is a zoological specimen. It has some scientific name, and it is stored in Naturalis Biodiversity Center. All of the rest of the detailed information is on the next level. But what important thing is that what we can do is that we can build smaller services based on this smaller metadata. So in the next slide, I have a quick example of one of the projects we're working with Biodiversity Data Journal in Pensoft. And there will be a publication coming up soon where we will be able to show the first DOI for digital specimen that's used in a publication. And one of the cool things we're doing with ARFA, sort of this is the editing platform for Biodiversity Data Journal, where you have a tooltip where you can hover over the DOI. And because of this extra metadata we have in the handle system, it can pull all of this information and display to you. So for example, here in the tooltip, you can see that this is, again, a specimen, the name, where it's stored. Of course, it has lots of other information. Then you can click on the DOI, and then it resolves to the full record. So this is some of the smaller way to show the value of course, the PID and the metadata. But again, imagine, we can do a lot more with that, with this kind of metadata, because of the infrastructure support that we have of the PID and other things. In the next slide, another example is annotation. So as I mentioned already, we're looking into digital specimen as a dynamic object. It's not just a static data. You can do things with that. And because of the persistent identifier and all the metadata we have. And we're treating the annotation also as a fair digital object. And we have an annotation model where we are following the W3C standards. And in our current implementation, we can actually go in and annotate these records. And we have a demo that you can see in this link to show how it works. And the demo also includes how to do it with machine annotation. So for example, as I mentioned before, let's say you have a service that reads a certain handwriting or tries to annotate a particular image. We will have a list of services. You can go in, click on that service and annotate and get an annotation record attached to the digital specimen. And also another plugin for our TEDWIC presentation coming up. If you're in TEDWIC, if you're joining, please check out some of the Disco presentation that we will have. And I think that's probably the last slide. Oh yeah, just a couple other things coming up in the next few months, also in the next year. So we're working towards what we're calling a minimum viable product. Again, Disco, as I mentioned, slowly going towards an operational phase. So we'll support more data enrichment, additional metadata, and of course, we are open to collaboration. If you're ready to test some of these things, please reach out. And one of the things we'll do again, assign more digital specimen DOIs with some sort of selected data set. So we're not ready to assign DOI to everything, but it will be a sizable representation. And then in the next couple of years, we are going towards full operational readiness. We want to integrate more with the data set from GBIF, and of course more DOI. And we are also thinking about proposing a field in Darwin Core where you can actually use the DOI as a standard element for all the specimen data. So it's not in a random field. So these are some of the things that we're really excited about that we're hoping to achieve in the coming years. So I think that's, yeah. So again, thank you for listening. And of course, thanks to our funders and supporters for this effort. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sharif. That was awesome. It's really exciting to see everything that's been done and where it's all going. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat. And with that, we're going to go into our last presentation about eye samples. It'll be Andrea Thomer. Go ahead and take it away when you're ready.
Thank you. Excuse me. How much time do I have?
Let's see.
About 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. So my name is Andrea Thomer. I'm an associate professor at the University of Arizona in the College of Information Science. So I'm an information scientist. I teach library and archives classes primarily. And so I was seeing in the chat discussions about mapping EAD to mods. So if you ever want to talk about that more, I've literally been teaching about that for like the last decade. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm talking about eye samples. So eye samples is a smaller project than both Disco and GBIF in some ways. We're a much smaller team. But since about 2020 or so, we've been working to create basically an aggregation platform for samples and specimen-based data. So I think that's the biggest difference that we have versus something like GBIF. We're focusing on sample and specimen metadata, not occurrences broadly. Another big difference from eye samples to other infrastructures is that we're trying our best to be aggressively interdisciplinary. So aggregating not just biodiversity specimens, but also archaeological samples, earth samples, core samples, all sorts of things. The idea there being that interdisciplinary research needs access to interdisciplinary materials, and that by kind of breaking down some of those silos, we can help people find materials in ways that is harder to do in other platforms right now. Next slide. Yeah, so the main challenge, I think I won't spend too much time on some of these things because other folks have talked about them. But it's challenging to represent material samples largely because samples, first of all, get disconnected from their context, by being literally removed from the place in the world that they're taken, and also because metadata gets lost along the way as things are curated. And it's hard to aggregate all of these specimens, even when you do have good metadata, mostly because everybody's using different kinds of metadata standards. Next slide. So our solution, attempted solution, is to create a common extensible model that works for a broad range of physical materials that are stored in collections and used by people working with samples, to provide consistent access through one portal, which is what iSample Central is, and providing these aggregations of physical sample records and specimen records for discovery and retrieval. Next slide. Okay, and so these are slides that were created by our co-PI, Dave Vieblace, and so I'm going to read this one because he's our infrastructure developer. So this is a high-level map of the iSamples infrastructure. Starting on the left, we have the source collection in whatever collection management system they're using. Sample records from the source collection are transformed to create records into the iSamples core metadata model. So basically, we're crosswalking records from different collection management systems into the iSamples kernel. We are using what we're calling iSamples in a box as kind of a piece of middleware to do that crosswalking. So there will be custom crosswalks for each collection's metadata into the iSamples model. Let's see. And iSamples Central is the aggregator that retrieves the iSamples core records from the iSamples in a box instances and combines the content to a common index for searching across the contributing collections. Next slide. Could you go back just one? Yeah, so the thing that changed in this little slide here is that we're exploring the use of different kinds of files to facilitate this sharing and aggregation. So right now, everything is stored in JSON, but we're exploring the use of Parquet as a way to store collection records in a more compressed format. It basically, it's easier to host in some ways. And Dave can talk about that more if you want to reach out to him. Next slide. And next one, I think. Thank you. So the goal of iSamples Central is to try to link samples to their context. So in this way, it's very similar to some of the goals of DISCO. So once we have this iSamples or the sample record in iSamples Central, it's easily visualized in a map, and that's what this central image is. The stacks of dots here represent stacks of samples that were all taken from one location. And if you squint, you can see that these little dots are color-coded, in this case, according to which of our 4 collections we're aggregating from. So I believe green is from Geome, which collects its DNA records. Orange is from CSAR, which is the System for Earth and Extraterrestrial Sample Registration. So those are geo records. And I think blue is the Smithsonian. So I think this shot is a good example of why aggregating these records together is really helpful, because you do get this this look at samples from across the ecology and across a range of different kinds of things that you can sample from there. All samples have a persistent identifier. Right now, we are not minting identifiers. We're aggregating them from collections that already provide persistent identifiers for their specimens. But the idea there being is that once you have that persistent identifier there, you could use that to link it to other kinds of context, not just the geo context, but things like publications, permits, people that were involved in the collection of samples. Next slide. And we also want to connect that with environmental data and try to collect samples with the data sets that were derived from the samples. So next slide. So a couple of our main outputs so far, I should have mentioned iSamples Central is technically live, and I actually do not have the URL for it right now, but if you email me, I can share it with you. We are planning on publicizing that more in the fall, but it's been kind of in a beta state for a little while. So iSamples Central is one major thing that we've built, but other major contributions or pieces of development are just the vocabularies themselves. So this diagram represents our approach to thinking about metadata. Identifiers are required for everything, and all samples are described by the iSample core metadata fields. And we have extension vocabularies for describing specimens from particular domains. So biodiversity specimens can have an additional level of description attached to them. Same thing with geospecimens and so on. So the goal here is that we have everything described in a common enough way that we can aggregate it and present it in one unified portal, but also not lose the specificity that's important to the different domains of science that we're trying to support here. Next slide. Our models and vocabularies are available on GitHub. So this is our core metadata model here. I'd be interested, I think we need to talk to the DISCO folks and see where ours are overlapping. Hopefully they are overlapping because we don't want to be reinventing wheels. So maybe that can be a discussion we have in the future. And next slide. And we also have our different controlled vocabularies available on GitHub. Some of this stuff is still in progress, so we're still working on getting these online. But yeah, so everything there is available for folks to use and comment on. Next slide. Finally, we're also doing some user studies. This is something that I'm particularly interested in doing. We want to make sure that we're not building something that's not actually usable to people that aren't on our immediate PI team. So my postdoc, Natalie Rea, has been leading these. So basically trying to understand how are people looking for samples, trying to do some human-computer interaction research. So far, these have entailed 30-minute semi-structured interviews and doing these think aloud studies. So having people use the interface, use iSample Central to try to do something, and we record them as they use the interface and try, and we ask them to think aloud. So tell us what they're trying to do, tell us what they think about things. And it's been a really effective way of getting feedback so far and understanding common pitfalls and easy improvements in a lot of cases. Next slide. And yeah, I think these are our outcomes so far. We are right now our first grant. So we've only had one grant. Like I said, we've only been working on this since about 2020, 2021. We're at the point where we're thinking about what's next for iSamples. We're interested in collaborating with other groups. One thing a lot of us are interested in is supporting discovery for, I don't want to say uncurated collections, but less curated collections. So collections that don't have much infrastructure, collections that are maybe kind of informally maintained in a random geology professor's office. There's a lot of potential reuse of these samples if you can actually find them. So that's something we're interested in doing next. I should have also mentioned the rest of the PI team at the beginning. I should have listed them. So other PIs are Dave Viglace at University of Kansas, Kirsten Leonard at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory, Chris Myers at Smithsonian, and Neil Davies at Berkeley. Yeah, I think that's it.
Fabulous. Thank you, Andrea. That was great. Again, like always, questions in the chat if you have some more questions. And I think we are ready to kind of jump into our next segment of big discussion. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike and take it away.
Great. Thanks, Dory. So excellent presentations. Really exciting to see some of the things that are already happening. And that's really the focus of the next part of our discussion. I want to open it back up to all of you to contribute to this and give your thoughts about what's already out there, what exists, what pieces of a digital extended specimen network are already there, and how can we think about starting to bring them together? And then, I'd like to talk about what's already out there for a little bit, and then in a few minutes, switch over to talking about what's missing. So again, please raise your digital hand if you have comments or questions, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Also, there were a number of really good questions raised in the chat during the presentations. If you're interested in getting an answer to those and would like to ask them in person, please do so.
Yes, Deborah.
Hi, Mike. Hi, everybody. I put it in the Google Notes. When you say, are there existing frameworks or pieces? One thing I note we're needing, and there are different communities trying to think of different ways to do this, is how to connect the data frameworks, but also then the human networks that want to use these data. So from the DigiCord network project, I can put a link in the chat if people want, or to the this notion of a biodiversity data sort of action center, community help desk, to how do we link the people who want to use these things that we're linking together. And I've put an example in there. It's a German research infrastructure project, NFDI for biodiversity, that some people here will be familiar with. And they have some 20 different infrastructures so far that they've linked together. And as part of that, they have a coordinated data help desk. So rather than go to each individual infrastructure and say, I don't know how to transform my data to use your service, I don't understand how this API works, I need help with whatever. And then you have to go to the next data service and the next data service. Instead, you go to one help desk and it's integrated across all the networks they serve. So I think that's a big return on investment for the people you envision who want to use what we're building, thinking about how to build that. So I put examples in the Google Doc.
Excellent. Thanks, Deb. Very useful, and an excellent example of building something to really facilitate all of this. Other thoughts? What sort of repositories, APIs, software? What's already out there? How close are Disco and GBIF and iSamples? How far are they getting us towards this ultimate goal that we're talking about? Donat?
A recently finished project was to create infrastructures of infrastructures. So with the intent to be cross-domain from genomics to occurrence to taxonomic names to literature. And it's just finished, but actually it goes very much along that line to be able to bidirectional link from all these different domains. So there's a website, it's the bicycle.eu, I will put it in here, but it's also a knowledge hub, which should actually help you to find different data in different places. So that's probably also helpful for that. And that's strongly interlinked with Disco and GBIF, so it's not something self-standing.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, if you could add those links in there, that would be very helpful. And again, just to reiterate part of what I said, are we most of the way there? Are we falling far short? And so maybe it'd be good to open the discussion to talking about not just what's out there, but what are key pieces that we're missing? What's not been developed yet that will need to be developed?
So one of the things that's always occurred to me is that this is as much a technological problem as it is a social problem. You can build as much technological infrastructure as you like, but if people are not playing by the rules and people aren't, minting identifiers and adding them to their publications or adding them to their sequences or whatever the case may be, you're not going to get any further than we are now. You're not going to be able to link these things together if you can't get people to play by the rules. So I think one of the things that we potentially are missing is sort of rules of the game, standardization and best practices for how people are supposed to do all of this stuff in an effective manner to make sure that these linkages are possible.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thanks, Andy. David.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Andy in this regard. And in particular, some of the things that I'm seeing with projects I'm involved in are just low-level standardizations for language for traits, for example, and making sure that everybody's using the same language for the traits. It's incredibly difficult to get everybody to do it, or even to agree on the language. But this is just one example of the types of rules that I think Andy is talking about, and it goes certainly well beyond that. But if we're not speaking the same language, we do have a challenge, and so I think trying to work in that direction is certainly worthy of an effort like this.
Thanks, David. That's great. I'll just chime in and also say I agree very strongly with that sentiment. For me, there's two sides of that coin. One is to making sure everyone's speaking the same language, so we all know what we're talking about. The other side of that coin, though, is making it easy for people to do that. I think one of the big hurdles right now, right at the level of data collection, is researchers are busy and they have so many things to worry about and so many formats and everything like that. So thinking broadly, I feel like what's really missing is something to facilitate and make it easy for researchers and data collectors to do what we want them to do to make their data more accessible. Deb?
Yeah, I'd like to circle back a minute on all of these topics and say, and Disco was the one from Sharif's presentation that got at part of what I want to say. And when I'm in these discussions, I hear a lot about sort of what I consider to be downstream benefactors. So one of the things that I'm learning that makes a network or a network of networks function well, one of the attributes we look for is benefits to multiple stakeholders in the group. Sounds like a no-brainer, but consider that almost everything we've said, except for the annotation comment that was made by Sharif about getting stuff back to the collections. The collections at the heart of most of our conversations here are the wellspring of the data that we want, of all the trait data that David just mentioned, for example. And when we want to use it, it's great. We also need to be figuring out how our systems allow us to give more value back to the people who are providing the data. And so thinking about what that means in terms of infrastructure and software, Bionomia would be the best example I can give right now, that our community greatly values for what they're getting back from it, from their efforts to digitize collections data. And if Bionomia went away tomorrow, they would miss it sorely. So what's our responsibility to make sure that we value and we show it by what we build, the people who are providing a lot of this information?
Excellent. Thanks, Deb. And I see from the reactions and the little Zoom rectangles on my screen that a lot of people agree with you on that. Kate.
Hello. Maybe going back to the human participation and trying to abide by similar rules, that side of things here too. Something that we bump into a lot in the standards working group is that can often be a good place just to get a sense for not just how do we speak the same language, but what languages are out there to speak, since those can be hard to know. It's hard to know what we don't know, that side of things, I guess. And to the extent that there's support for people to participate and take the time to participate in those kinds of groups, whether it's in the standards groups or I liked the, I think Andrea showed us some of the work that they're doing to like test out, you know, is this system working for people to adopt? That's something that I know, at least on my plate, that always falls off. And that's such a critical piece to encouraging adoption and having workshops, that kind of thing. Just my 2 cents.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Wouter.
You muted,
Wouter.
Wouter.
I think you're muted.
I unmute myself. Responding to Deb, some things that it will bring to the users, to the provider of the data, is yeah, of course, these annotation services. So it can provide some help with digitization, with quality control improvements, etc. But also it provides provenance, because in digital specimen data model we put a lot of effort in recording provenance, all the things that happen with the data and with the specimen over time are recorded. So that I think will also be of great added value. In terms of what's missing, I think technically most things are in place to create digital specimens. We think we can go in production by the end of this year with a minimum valuable product, as Sharif said, for Disco. There are a few gaps there. For instance, there is no simple way to share a digital specimen DOI yet. There is no provision in Darwin Core, the most widely used standard in our community, for that. There are a couple of other metadata fields also still missing. We have a data model, but the data model is currently under review, so it may still change. So that needs to be finalized. What's mainly missing is the network part, the people part. But I think first we need to, after technical implementation, need to go to a certain level of content before we can further develop into that. And what's there also needed is easy mechanisms to find data, to aggregate data, etc.
Very good. Thank you, Wouter. Torsten.
Hi, I'm Torsten Diko. I'm a researcher and curator at the Smithsonian NMNH Natural History Museum. And so I have two hats, one as a researcher pushing data out, and one as a curator being in charge of collections and then also ultimately guiding digitalization of that collection. And sort of, I want to get back to these, and maybe the comment in the chat I put earlier, to get the data back to the collections actually. So we can update our data with these DOIs that are being minted. Or the example that Marie showed in her, the data that came from PLASI, from publication data about specimens. And I saw it was a USNM specimen, so I went to our database. It's not in our database. So these sort of merging of finding the same records that we now would provide for this specimen that has been coming through GBIF from PLASI, I get almost like a ping, and I need to update my record in my collection. So it has a unique identifier from our museum, which I think it didn't have according to the screenshot I did. And sort of this whole thing of the museums have to be updated when outside sources find different things, connect specimens, and how is that going to happen? That requires resources, but also people just being notified and then implemented. And then the next step would be that these will be merged and be representative of one specimen at the core, that digital specimen record, but there's an organism, for my biological example, in the collection somewhere. So how do we do that in the long run?
Great, thank you. Wouter, did you have another comment, or is your hand remaining up from your previous?
No, I will lower it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Andrea.
I wanted to make a comment in terms of on the people and social side of things. I think one of the struggles that I have had personally, and I know the iSamples team in general has had, is that there's not one place to go to talk about these projects that we're working on. There's like 17 different meetings. So like Kirsten originally was going to be going to Spinach Tadwig. However, I think she now has to make it a virtual presentation because she's traveling literally every other week, if not every week before that. And I know that's the case for a lot of us, and it's because especially when we're in different disciplinary communities, I have to go to information science conferences, and I do a lot of earth science conferences, which means I don't have time to go to Tadwig or something like that. So I think a missing piece, in short, is easy ways of communicating that don't require flying across the globe or subscribing to 20 different listservs, if at all possible. I don't know, maybe we just have to do that hard work of paying attention to lots of different communities, but I would love it if there's a way to kind of streamline that somehow.
Mm-hmm. Very good, thank you. James.
Hello, everyone. So, my question has always been a little bit, since I've worked a lot on annotations and that kind of thinking and this data interoperability, is how much do the data providers actually want back? I think there's a lot of value that could come back, but storing it is a huge burden. I mean, I work for a federal government, and they're complaining about how much data we have and the cost of maintaining it. And this is simple databases, but when you go to pictures and media, as you know well, Mike, expenses go up, and there's sensitivity to that by management, right? Not just curating the specimens, but the data. So I think we have to be practical here too, based on the staffing at the places that provide, right? Some are big, some are very small. So what can they take back? What systems do we need in order for them to take anything back and have any kind of provenance on why they took it back, where it came from, all of those things? And so I think that what that says is we're missing that centralized, in quotes, distributed centralized place that keeps track of all of that stuff that no one else can, but is still tappable through probably AI-based querying these days to find stuff that's valuable about you and your collection in some kind of easy way. Because the scale of this, especially with machine-based annotations, is daunting, you know, to major communities like industry, let alone you know, the sort of poor one-offs like us. So just a, you know, cautionary tale a little bit about what can we really achieve.
That's a great point, James. And you have a very good broad general point, but also nestled with that in that a secondary point about we need to be thinking about collections and institutions of different size and different levels of resourcing. I think that's a really important point. Donat.
Yeah, I would also say something missing a little bit is the notion that we should look into the future. So digitization is not digitizing old specimens and old literature, but we really have to make sure that we look in the future how we publish much more efficiently. And for that, I would like to draw a little bit of attention to what's happening in the CTAF e-publishing group and then PennSoft, and in this world where we actually talk very intensively, how can we publish like specimen data much more efficiently? And there is now a workflow that allows to publish a publication and it shows up within a very short time in GBIF. So the specimens are in GBIF, and from a specimen, you can go back to a treatment, you can go back to literature, you can find out how this has been collected and so on. You can look at figures. And I think that's a very important element that we look into this, because we probably still publish PDF in the next 20 years or 10 years at least. But what we can do is to talk to the folks here, mentioning that if they publish like specimen data a bit more structured, it can be much easier be integrated into global frameworks. So the point is looking to make how to use the digital specimen in the future in publications.
Excellent. Very good. Deb?
I want to clarify something, so we're very, very sharp on what we say about this data feedback and the issues that people are raising. There's a difference between saying there's all this extra data that's out there, for example, the data in Wikidata, and the need to build integrated services where our APIs link our database to our people data to what's already in Wikidata, so the data doesn't have to live in our databases. So that goes to the people who do risk management, policy development, deciding what's going to live in our database and what can live elsewhere. And that gets to trust issues, right? That gets to how can I trust that this API and these data are going to be around forever? What would I lose if I don't store it locally? So those kinds of conversations need to happen. At the same time, what I referred to earlier was not the taking back or the adding of all this extra information to your own resource, but was to the point that things like Bionomia give collections the ability to know about their use, which is something that they've been asking for eons. How do we know when our specimens have ended up in a data set that gets published? How do we know what it's being used for? And it provides a very real way to know that. And that's the kind of thing when I was talking about return on investment and return on effort for what they do, is how can we make sure that they have credit in ways that they can use locally, and in addition to all these other decisions they have to make. So thanks for that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Deb. That was very good. David?
Yeah, I also thank you, Deb. You mentioned a couple things that I was going to say, so I don't have to, which is always lovely. Yeah, but I think my point is very much in support of what James is saying, is that sometimes it makes sense for data to return to a collection. In other instances, it doesn't make sense for that. And that's why we have other resources out there. I'm certainly hearing from a number of CMS developers that they're questioning why everything needs to be in the home or the host data set or database, and that's a bigger discussion somewhere else. But it also just reminded me that if we're going to be dealing with situations where there's data out there that needs to be linked or is automatically linked, for example, through a GBIF clustering situation or otherwise, how do we handle the situation where perhaps the original institution or the host institution of the specimen doesn't agree with the additional data? And then how do you handle that, especially if they're not going to bring it back in? Just a question, but I think James has a really, I think James's point is one worth keeping in the back of our minds at all times when we're dealing with essentially moving towards a more semantic view of how data works. Thanks.
Thanks, David. That's an interesting point about, it feeds into data quality as well. And thinking about that is a really important point. Thank you. Torsten.
I would just like to caution, science is about falsification, it's about hypothesis testing or verifying information is correct. So if the owning institution doesn't get data back, will it be lost? What the actual specimen is? I mean, it's maybe some number in some OpenDS, as we have seen from the example that Wouter posted. But ultimately, somebody has to go back, has to extract DNA again, has to look at the specimen again, talking about biological specimens, to verify some hypothesis or some scientific statement. If that can't be done, then the data is useless as it is floating around in space, sort of. So I think it's important that there should be some feedback, and maybe not forever, but at least for some timeline, that it's not lost what is actually based on, because otherwise we can just make up stories about evolution here, evolution there, if we can't actually point to it, what we're studying or examining.
Great, thank you. An important point. If the co-organizers are good with this, I think maybe we could move to the next slide and start the third part of our conversation, because we've already started to touch on this in some of the comments that are being made. So Andy, if you could advance, thank you. So for the final part of the discussion today, we wanted to turn to this question about challenges, major challenges. These have already started to come up in a lot of the comments, but I'd like to focus in a bit more on those. What are the social issues that are coming up and the social needs to address those? What sort of challenges are out there for integrating very disparate types of data sources? Restrictions due to FAIR data, and then the ownership and gatekeeping, who takes care of that? So if I could open it up and have us start to focus about some of these challenges, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'll start with one of my thoughts, which comes up in my head a lot when we have these conversations, and that is that some of the data we're talking about are very much associated with a physical object, a specimen, and they are data derived from that specimen or associated with that specimen. But I think we're also talking about data that aren't necessarily associated with the specimen that's in somebody's collection. So for example, eBird observational data make up a large part of GBIF. Are there challenges there for bringing those together or not? I feel like there may be, but I'm curious what others think. Tim.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm an engineer by background, and so I obviously think about this problem from that perspective. One of the challenges we've identified at GBIF is our data models that we're using are insufficient to capture the kind of data that we're trying to integrate. And one of the pieces of work that I'm actually quite enthused about is that we're actually beginning to address this as a community. So we've started to look at enriching the data model in GBIF, and that's building out a semantic layer with Darwin Core. And it's very encouraging to see this start to get picked up. You've just heard from the Disco group that they've formed the basis of their model around the kind of ideas that have come from this data modeling work. And it is the result of a lot of work from across our community. So when we're integrating these data types across the various data spaces, having just a structure into which we can integrate data, a data model, is definitely necessary. But I'm actually quite enthused at the progress that we've been making on that in recent years.
Excellent. Thanks. Donat?
Yeah, just following up with Tim, we think it's very helpful to have this communication with infrastructures like GBIF and to extend their data model. So in our case, we have like 500 million pages of biodiversity literature making up all our libraries. We have more than 1,000 journals publishing every year new data, publishing maybe 17,000 new species per year. We don't really know because we don't have access to that. So one challenge is really how we can scale up from the small scale production we have. We liberated recently like 1 million treatments from 100,000 publications. So how can you scale that up? And how can you avoid having to scale up? So that's what I mentioned before. How can we make sure our communication, scientific communication, is immediately part of the digital extended specimen? Mm-hmm. And I have a second point. It is what I often see now is that we produce all these fantastic digital objects, but they are sort of lost and we can't access them because they're on servers and institutions. And one solution could be that we talk to instances or research infrastructures like Zenodo and make use of their sort of unlimited space to make sure we actually can create fair data out of the digital objects we create and really make them long-term accessible. And I think that's something we should probably discuss here as well.
Excellent. Thank you for bringing that up. James?
So just building on my last comment about scale and scope and what other people have been saying, I mean, we sort of created that Biodiversity Alliance concept, right? Which is still floating there. And I think, I think this is something we desperately need, because I think we need a centralized point that can go beyond just us and seek out, industrial is probably the wrong word, industrial, commercial, anyone who can help support the infrastructure that we need, because we do not have the funds or sort of ability within, the grants and things that we pull together, which are usually short-termed. For a long-term game, I think we really need to be providing services to commercial, industrial partners who see value in what we have and are willing to support it. So how do we get, an Amazon, a Google, somebody to say, oh yeah, that's a service, yes, they'll make a bit of money on it, but they will help, underpin what it is we need to do, because our scale and scope is immense.
Excellent. Kate?
Maybe in that vein as well. So I'm over at Natural History Museum in Chicago, and we often bump into that long-term preservation storage infrastructure issue. Something that's coming to mind that may be relevant here, we talk a lot with morphosource.org on the CT storage side of things. And while we would very much love for an external site or platform to cover and take over that cost for us, it's also part of our remit to be responsible for some of the, if it's specimen records that we are documenting and taking care of in-house, we do need to make sure that whatever long-term preservation we're offering and promising for that complies with whatever long-term promises we're making. And to that effect, just coordinating more broadly with other institutions, if that's appropriate. Morphosource.org is looking at some of those distributed storage approaches, I guess, to managing long-term preservation for CT scans. Granted, that isn't touching on all of the interoperability issues that we're dealing with here. But where it comes down to, if part of that, how do we even sustain this? And while it would be awesome if Amazon or one of the big guys came in and supported it, if part of that relies on our making a decision around what defines a given repository's general remit and what it takes care of, thinking about those fuzzy edges, especially the more that we extend a digital specimen, and basically calculating from that what can and should we support each of us as an individual institution, whether it's museum, a platform, otherwise, that kind of thing. I guess my brain goes blank there a little bit, but the archive.org types of models, that they seem so close, and yet, like, if you sneeze, like, does that fall apart? And just figuring out how to balance those long-term, massive kinds of scale things. It seems like they're good models, but I'll stop blathering. That's what's in my mind.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you, Kate. And it gets to, I think, some of the earlier points that a couple of others made about trust and being certain that these mechanisms and repositories and tools will be there in the future, which always comes back to sustainability. And Michelle had a good comment there about legal protections as well. Larry.
No, I hesitated to bring this up, but now that Google and Amazon have arisen in the conversation, to the extent that this community believes that their information is of value, potentially commercial value, which I assume they do, at least I think they do, genetic sequencing, new drugs, new medicine, that sort of thing, then there probably should be a thread of conversation here somewhere about protecting that value and not letting it get scooped up by one of our predatory infrastructure builders as they sort of expand inexorably across various things. There's no particular answer to that I know of, but it should be something to think about. We want to be fair and open, but we don't want to be stupid. And you may want to have a set of people who begin to think about that.
Great, thanks, Larry. I think Michelle, you made a comment there about legal protections. Is that the sort of thing that you were referring to as well?
Yeah. Here, let me just get my video on. Yeah, that's definitely touches on it. Going through all the various things that we talked about, and especially when we start talking about the social side of things and acceptance on the social engineering side. I mean, so much of this is dependent on basically people, goodwill and best intentions. And we know we've had examples where that's not necessarily something that you can rely on. So yeah, there's a lot of issues around data, our kinds of data that hasn't even been really addressed in terms of people's personal data and what is legally ours. I think the EU has probably better protections, but there's certainly no global standards for biodiversity data and who actually owns it, who can use it, not what's commonly accepted, but what can be, legally enforced. So I hear, so in the early days of when we were trying to aggregate and share data in the days of Manus, Ornis, and HerpNet and VertNet, it was a common refrain from curators that they were worried about people stealing all of their museum's data. I don't think that was a misplaced paranoia, actually. It's easier now than ever. What they would do with that, I'm not really sure. But people who try to commodify anything can be very creative. And I think there's actually some motivation now, especially with these ideas of carbon credits and ideas of creating a biodiversity credit potentially. So there's all sorts of discussions around those areas to make it economically interesting now to have this kind of data. And, as we move forward, I think it needs to be more of a consideration. But this gets way beyond, I think, a bunch of biodiversity scientist, to be honest.
Right. I think we don't have quite the right people in the room to have that kind of discussion, but we could certainly think about who we need to be talking to about what. So I think that that's a really important caution. James.
Yeah, just building a little bit on that to say that at least in my government, data governance has become something that is talked about, which sort of seems to encompass even the stewardship part, but the indigenous part in Canada, the genetics, genomics difficulties and the personal pieces that Michelle was talking about not identifying person, places, and things. It's a big mixed bag. And so now we have this thing called data governance. And the trouble is that governance is going to be placed on our portals, repositories, whatever you want to say, right? And man, some of this stuff, the IP side of this is very complicated. And not only is it very complicated, it's super slow. So, just to get permission to say, can I put this thing in the open has become, a crapshoot at best. Even if it seems like a no-brainer. So I think we're also living in a different time. And I think this is something, fair and open, but we have our challenges, not just in government, we have our challenges because of that. The times have changed a bit on us.
Yeah, I would say the times are changing rapidly and continue to change. And just hearing where this discussion's at right now, I'm starting to think some of the biggest challenges are not technological, but institutional, governmental, legal, surrounding IP. Donat.
Yeah, sorry to raise my voice again. So
No.
in recent EU projects, there's been a lot of work done to look into the legal issues of what's data, what's copyrighted, and all of that. So if you're interested, look at outputs from that side. So I think it's pretty extensive. There will be also at least one talk at the current TED Week talking about data and what's copyrighted and what's not. And there's another thing to consider. I mean, a lot of our funding comes from governments. And one of the government's issue is they fund science to raise the welfare of our society. That means science is to create results that can be reused to create money out of it. And I think this is one issue we should look into as well. So the more people use our stuff, including those who build these huge infrastructures, in a way, the better. Actually, in a sense, that's what the taxpayer wants. They want us to create things that they are used and create credits, and also at the end create taxes that we can reuse. So there is not just stealing data, but actually enabling in the future our research. I think it's just one thing to consider as well.
Yes, very good point. Andy, I saw you had a comment in the comment stream about balancing FAIR principles with data protection. Do you want to make that? I think it's a good one.
Yeah, I think it's a slippery slope. The more you protect data, the less fair the data becomes. There are obviously pieces of data that need to be protected, but there are other pieces of data that need to remain fair and accessible. And it's how do you balance those two in order to make best use of the data, but also protect it from being scavenged by these corporate entities that are just looking to gain monetary value from those assets without returning any attribution to the original sources where they're getting that data from. And I think it's this is the slippery slope that we really need to navigate. And others have been making comments about, there are other people out there who've obviously navigated these situations before. And I think we need to learn lessons from them to figure out how to do that in order to be able to, navigate that very, very fine line between fair data and protecting all of these assets and various pieces of information that we're putting out there.
Excellent. Thank you. Other thoughts? Kate.
I'll make it quick. Kind of in that vein, part of why we at the Field Museum we defaulted to a CC BY NC license on a lot of our media stuff. This feels a little rabbit hole-y, but seems related to. I realize that particular restriction on to non-commercial usage for any media related to specimens is not the most open license, but it seems like revisiting those discussions around data norms from years gone by too seems relevant here. And some of the choices that as a community we made to try and put protections and finding that balance between protected and open seem relevant here, where commercial interests in particular come up. We might find a lot of friends over on the artist community side of things, especially with the AI type of harvesting of that kind of data. But at the same time, when it relates to personally identifiable information, I don't know that that was as deep a topic that we explored during the data norms discussions from way back. I'll go
Excellent.
do some.
Interesting idea. Yeah, the artist community have been dealing with really interesting IP issues for a long time. And, thinking about how they've addressed those is a really good idea.
I think one of the other issues that we face at the moment is that there are so many different access points for the data.
Mm-hmm.
You've got your own web portal that comes from your CMS. You've got data that goes into GBIF, it goes into IDIG Bio, it goes into all sorts of other portals, and it's accessible from all sorts of different places, which makes it that much more difficult to protect the data because it's showing up in all these different places. And I agree with James in the chat. One of the areas that we struggle with is APIs, where you can literally go in through an API and you can scrape all that data out and nobody's the wiser. At least with things like GBIF and those kinds of places, we have an idea of who's asking for the data, who's downloading the data, and what they're using it for. But through APIs, you can gain access to all of that data. You can scrape the whole damn thing and you can bring it down and do whatever you want with it, and nobody's going to be the wiser. And so I think, part of the problem is that it's a big bad world out there, and the infrastructure that we currently have is very disjointed and very sort of disambiguated.
Right.
Where you have access through CMSs, access through aggregators, access through publications, access through other things like Morphosource and other sources of information, and it's just a minefield. Somehow we've got to simplify that minefield and make it a single access point to all the data that is then managed in a coordinated fashion by the entire community. How we do that, I don't know. I mean, things like Disco and iSamples are getting close to that sort of paradigm. But what worries me is that, again, we've got multiple different efforts. Are those efforts coordinated and complementary, or are they working at cross purposes to each other and developing pieces of infrastructure that are really not going to work together?
Great, thanks. A very important point. Good observation. Jose.
Yes, it's a really difficult problem, and at IDIG Bio, we struggle with it. We are under a mandate from NSF, so that kind of makes things clear as to what we need to do. We do what NSF tells us to do. But I think with the extended specimen, we might have to face a reality that is broader than just the reality of specimen data. Because the very act of extending specimen data requires that we have access to other data. And the other data that we have access to hopefully will be fair, but in reality, it will not for all kinds of extensions. And so we might have to think in terms of joining some kind of, to use overused words, an ecosystem or a data market where we have to figure out ways of having agreements that may be monetary or otherwise, where there are exchanges of data and extensions that are mutually beneficial. And it could be a very different world from what we have today. In my opinion, the control over the data should stand with the provider. There will be enormous variety of providers in terms of those who absolutely want their data to be accessible in all cases versus those who are very protective of the data for good reasons, for both sides, for good reasons. And so there has to be a continuum from a technological standpoint of support that covers all of these. Data that is chargeable, data that is to be protected, data that is not, at a much larger scale that we have today. So there's so much more that can be said about this. But I think, as we transition to extended data, we might have to define these boundaries and mechanisms to protect them as a priority task.
Great, interesting ideas. Larry, I see your hand up.
Object architecture, which is what DISCO is trying to follow, is that the permission structure of an entity travels with the entity. It's part of the entity. It's not part of the system that provides it. It is true, once you extract data from someplace, you do whatever you want with it. But at least if you have it in object form, and part of the key to that object is the permission structure, license, whatever you characterize that as, then you have a chance of having that follow the object.
Mm-hmm. Great. We have just a couple more minutes for any additional closing thoughts before I turn it back over to Dory. Okay, then. Oh, James, go ahead.
I just wanted, scale and scope again. And I'm channeling Deb here. Let's look at bionomia for a second and just say, hey, here's a very specific thing that provides a great resource to our community that is, well, is it long-term sustainable? David and I were just joking about that over the chat. But anyway, hopefully it can be long-term sustainable. So, and I think we do a lot of talking. We need to do a lot of talking about the big picture. How do we get massive investment into the infrastructures we would need to do our future vision, right? But maybe we should also focus a little bit on being on the slow side of just, hey, if everybody could put up one very small service, just one little thing. I mean, Mike, you're a little bit biased, but your place does a great job of that, right? And that's within a university house, which isn't the easiest thing to do, and to also have that public side to it. Government institutions, super risk averse. Most university institutions, unfortunately, fairly risk averse. So those services have to be said to them that they don't put them at risk, right, somehow. But if we could just knit together a bunch of those little guys as a start, I mean, I think that would make a real point.
That's great. So I really first appreciate the shout out, but also the side idea of everybody putting little pieces out, getting back to what's the starting point and how can we get this thing going. Okay, I think that's a great comment to segue out of the discussion and back to Dory for a wrap up.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for leading that discussion, and thank you for everyone for your contributions. We have been furiously typing, trying to capture your chat comments and verbal comments into the Google Doc. Please feel free to go in there, add to it if you didn't get to say things you were thinking about, or as you have ideas later, or just to edit and correct if we did not appropriately capture your contributions. Please help us out with that. We're going to also have those same set of questions that we've talked about today on our listening page website, which is now linked in the chat. So if you have new or different thoughts, you can also post them there, as well as if you have other folks that weren't able to attend that you think would have some great contributions to that, please feel free to share that link as well. So moving forward in the second year of the project, in partnership with key individuals from each listening session, we'll be organizing a 2-day virtual interdisciplinary workshop to be able to delve deeper into discussions about our collaborative path forward. So the goal of that workshop is to bring together a more expansive, non-conventional configuration of potential user communities to work together to develop the recommendations and create a roadmap that outlines our gaps, needs, and actions for building this fair, open, integrated biological and environmental data network. So those discussions will address how the various representative communities, like the one today, as well as from the other listening sessions, will work together to augment our initiatives with the ultimate vision of integrating data, which, as we know, is a big task. So if you would like to attend that workshop in spring of 2025, please let us know about your interest via this Google form that is now also dropped into the chat. And with that concludes our listening session for today. And we really thank your participation here today and for joining in. This was very helpful. Anyone else in the committee want to add anything on here at the end?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for your participation and for adding your thoughts. As has been said, we would love to keep this conversation going. So please go back to that Google Doc and add any thoughts that we may not have captured, so that we can use those along with the AI summary and the chat and various other resources to put together a good summary of this listening session to add to all of the other summaries that will then be used to inform the workshop. So thanks very much.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.